Welcome to Beyond Talking Points from Little Visionaries Bookstore. I'm Bridgitte Jackson-Brumley, and today I'm speaking with Pamela Brinker. Pamela W. Brinker holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Denver. As a well-respected and experienced psychotherapist and licensed clinical social worker for 32 years, Pamela has treated thousands of clients and developed over 20 tools and practices to teach everyday bravery. Pamela joins us to discuss her first book in a three-part series, Conscious Bravery, Caring for Someone with Addiction. Welcome, Pamela.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's wonderful to have you. Okay, so my first question is, it's along the lines that we live in a punitive society, okay, where the idea of just learn the hard way means you'll learn the lesson and won't do whatever it is again, or that's the thought behind that. And I think this really seems to do more harm than good. So the message that I get from Conscious Bravery is to have a heart-centered focus for what's in front of you. That's really strong in your book, to have a full acceptance of others in the moment and have love for them. And that it's a journey from the head to the heart, I'm sure, to exhibit conscious bravery. So could you begin by explaining to us what is conscious bravery and what led you to this heart-centered approach as opposed to the learn the hard way approach?
Conscious bravery is the ability to know whatever is needed in any given moment and then take action and do that. It's an awakening, an awareness state, and we're able to do seemingly opposing things because we have different kinds of responses built into our innate capacity for bravery. For example, we might choose to be tender and quiet and patient, Bridgitte, or we may choose to leap in and take some save the day action. And we might do anything in between. There's a gray area, it's not just black or white. So conscious bravery is an awareness, a conscious presence with our situation and with ourselves so that we're able to make the rightest choice.
Okay, so how did you get to this point? I know you had some difficulties in your life. How did you decide to take this approach as opposed to being, I don't know, stern and okay, he can just sit in jail. We won't go bail him out. He can learn the hard way. How did you come to the heart?
Yes, I learned the hard way myself, I think.
Okay.
It really began, well, I've been a psychotherapist for a really long time, for about 31 years. And I really went into psychotherapy because some family members of mine, some cousins, had taken their own lives. Two of my cousins had committed suicide. They'd struggled with major depression, and they were brilliant men. And so I think I unconsciously became a psychotherapist, sort of hoping that I could protect my own family once I got married and had children of my own. But of course, that's not the case, right? We can't, life just gives us what it gives us. And we don't have that much control. But what happened was, that led me to conscious bravery was that about 12 years ago, my second husband was diagnosed with a grade 4 glioblastoma brain cancer, which is an incurable brain cancer. And then he died a year and 3 months after. And my sons, in their grief and pain, turned not just to each other and to me, but unbeknownst to me, they also started relying on drugs and alcohol as the answers to their pain. And so I was working on myself, trying to grieve and trying to be present with them. And yet within 3-4 years, they became addicted to stimulants and methamphetamines. And so their challenges became really huge, and they had some mental health challenges as well. And so I really had to revise everything I had learned, Bridgitte, and everything I'd ever taught my clients and worked with them in terms of holding space for our pain while at the same time moving forward through things. And I noticed initially, before I started modifying some of the tools and practices I taught, that I was strong arming it. Historically, I had been a triathlete and a musician. I had just practice, train. And I had a kind of an assertive, maybe overly assertive approach to things. And I had to dial that back and see that sometimes what I needed for myself was kindness and tenderness. And then thereby I could pass that on to my sons. I could be more present with them when they didn't need an assertive mom, they needed a compassionate mom.
That's wonderful, because when you go into addiction, it is an escape from your consciousness. It's relief from whatever it is in your mind that is tormenting or ailing you, or whatever it is that you're suffering from. And it is a call for love, you know?
Absolutely. And so I love the way you said that, a call for love. And, like you said, our society tends to emphasize just do it, the Nike slogan,
Yes.
that if we want something, all we have to do is change our mindset. And I love how you used come into our hearts, heartfulness. I believe we come into our hearts and we come into our bodies as well. And we listen to our intuition. And we may not do what our intuition tells us to do, or we may not respond to our bodies in the immediate moment, but we tend to our whole being with a new kind of awareness that includes what's happening in our thoughts and what's happening in our hearts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you said that you had initially an overly aggressive response, and you were trying to strong arm it. So you went through a period of just trying to force it, just trying to hammer it in what you thought should happen, and you learned that wasn't serving anyone. It wasn't yielding the highest good for everyone. And so at some point, you decided to just take a step back and reassess and approach it differently, correct?
You got it. And it wasn't really just me that realized that. I credit it to what I would call the triad of connection. I credit it to a relationship I have with God and the universe, what maybe some people call the Tao or source or nature. And so I listened to the grace that was being given me that, hey, I can't just tell my sons what to do. I've got to sit quietly and ask them, hey, what are you feeling? What do you think you're going to do about that? I'm here with you. Listen, pause,
Mm-hmm.
And I learned to do that partly because of the other connection, not just with God or the universe, but also with other beautiful people like you. I enlisted a bunch of people on my team, and I'd always been a person who believed in having a therapist as needed, or an acupuncturist as needed. I've gone to energetic work with chiropractic and with acupuncture and things like that. But I really had to pool my resources and get more people on my team regularly that
Mm-hmm.
I really vulnerably opened up to. And that took some commitment too, because like I said, I made a lot of mistakes. And sometimes I would be embarrassed to tell my therapist, oh, I did it again. I asked my son if he followed through on his therapy appointment, or if he signed up for community service. And I should have just waited to see, hung out with him for a little while and waited to see if he offered the information,
We do have the tendency, to sometimes ruminate. I should have, I wish I had done this differently, but nothing is futile. Everything's service, don't you think? Because you can look back and you can say, okay, at the time I did the best I could with the consciousness that I had. And in my worldview at that time, that was the appropriate response. But where I am now, I can choose differently. And that's also applicable to someone similar to your sons who are suffering like you. It just seems to me like if you have addictive tendencies, like you have to get to a point when you're willing to see, try, perceive, or do something different. You have to step out of that mindset that brought about the problem, correct?
We have to reconfigure our perceptions of how to do things. It's not linear. Like you're saying, it is not linear. And I really believe there's value in making mistakes. Not that I go out of my way to make them, or I want my sons to make them either, or my husband. But, there's just not an A to B to C to D way of of things going in this life. And that's part of what conscious bravery is too. We're consciously making choices, but then maybe they weren't the rightest choice. So then I believe we come into our situation with compassion and like, oh, I did that. I made that choice. Okay. That didn't go so well, and bring in tender compassion and empathy to ourselves and this situation. And thereby we get more clarity about what to do next. And so we might wander away from what we thought was the path we were supposed to be on. But for me, then I wander back to maybe a different path that is more clear and not as bumpy, because I've learned from mistakes. So I think we learn more from our mistakes than our successes. Do you kind of believe that too?
Yeah. Well, I think if you are a contemplative person and you're willing to look, there was something there for you. The mirror, the situation is mirroring something for you. You have to be willing to receive it. So
That's a great way to put it.
in the book, you list bravery keys, which are key points to aid in bravery. And you write about that both of your young adult sons have toiled through addictions, mental health battles, trauma, injuries, and huge legal issues for years, and that you were divorced after 21 years of marriage and cared for your new husband through brain cancer, which you mentioned earlier, and then his passing. So are you able to pinpoint like when being brave began for you? Like when you made the pivot or the transition?
Yes.
Was there a defining moment or was it gradual?
I think it was both. I believe it was both, but there was a pivotal point, Bridgitte, when, and I would love our listeners to know this, because this is part of the grace of consciousness and the diligence and effort that we put into our own consciousness. There was a time after my husband had passed away when both of my sons were really struggling, and they'd gotten a ticket, and we were trying to decide, do they both need treatment? They'd gotten a ticket, one of them for possession of weed and the other one for driving under the influence. So anyway, I had this just overwhelming sense, I can't do this. I can't do this. And I remember walking around my house by myself, just saying that like a mantra. And it was a really hopeless time. And it lasted maybe off and on for a few days. And then finally, grace kind of came to me. I call it that because I don't know what else to say about it. But I remembered something that Cheryl Strayed said in her book, Tiny Beautiful Things. And she said that we parents don't have the luxury of despair. And that just hit me in a really moving way, not a judgmental way. And I said, I've got to do this. I'm a single parent and I've got two sons who are struggling. I've got to do this. In fact, then later that day, I remember feeling like this overwhelming sense came that I have the privilege of doing this. And then forward for the next few days, I said, I'm just going to pretend I chose this life.
Okay.
I'm going to pretend that if I had known all the options before birth, and I really wanted to live a really vibrant, full life and be connected to the divine and really love other people well and make a difference in this world, what would I have chosen? And I started pretending I chose these exact challenges. And
well, when I was reading your book, I was thinking about a book that I had read years ago that was pivotal for me when I was in my own crisis, and it's entitled Your Soul's Plan. And it was about these difficult, the plans that we have for ourselves prior to being born, to incarnating, and these difficulties that we experience when we get here to cultivate qualities. And there does seem to be so much that was cultivated along the lines of compassion and acceptance. These are spiritual qualities that we're all attaining. Well, people who are consciously on the spiritual path are trying to attain and cultivate acceptance, surrender, love, and compassion for whatever is in front of you. But it is not always difficult. So when you were just speaking that you had the day of saying, I can't do this anymore, it reminded me of I think it was a chapter, I don't know, it wasn't a chapter, but you write one impossible step at a time in the book. Mm-hmm. It's just beautiful for me because so many times
Mhm.
you're moving through a difficult situation with your knees trembling, but you still have to take that impossible step forward, not knowing where it'll lead you.
Mhm.
But I think
Thank you.
that's how you cultivate the conscious bravery.
Absolutely. It's a commitment and it's a diligent process. So we recommit, and then for me, and for what I teach my clients and in my workshops, we have to re-find that motivation to keep going. And it's not just a mindset shift, and it isn't even just a heart shift. It's a combination of doing a lot of these kinds of things and putting a bunch of different tools and practices in our toolkit so that we can, in essence, put the oxygen mask on our own face first, even if the plane is going down, instead of trying to take care of our loved ones first, like we women are so good at doing, you know? And so really you're talking to go back to what you mentioned a moment ago, how do we put one impossible foot, or how do we take one impossible step at a time? And to me, it's that we make friends with change and the unknown.
Yes.
We have to quit fighting change. And so that's why I have a whole chapter on what I call a now there's this approach. So I say that often, okay, wow, when I'm given news or some different thing happens that I wasn't expecting and did not invite into my life, I might just stop and pause and go, now there's this. And it's an acceptance of the new. And that is, I believe, a way to come back into presence and to live this spiritual life that we're really talking about. It's not just an intentionality. We actually live it. We don't just want bravery, we have it. And we keep cultivating it because we're doing different kinds of things throughout our days. We're doing gratitude prayers. We're offering empathy for ourselves and others. We're doing our good self-care. Even when it's hard, we just do something for ourselves that's a benefit, like go for a walk or do some conscious breathing, something that helps us re-find our presence and recenter, and those kinds of things all build on each other. Nothing happens in isolation.
That is so true. That is so
Yeah.
good, Pamela. It is so true. I could not agree more.
Mm.
Sometimes when you're desperate, when times are difficult, you could be looking for the quick fix. Just make it go away. I just want it to stop. But it is these compounding practices that really do help, because it is so true. You can't be of service to anyone. You can't do anything if you are just flailing along yourself with no grounding, no footing. So I really like the word you use, to recommit, and the phrase to make friends with change, because it seems the invitation is to let change change you.
I love that. And I also really appreciate you saying that we can't help anyone else if we're flailing. Not
Yeah.
that we can't fall, but kind of, I'm maybe older than you are, and maybe some of your listeners. And I remember weebles when I was young. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down.
Oh,
But
yeah.
but we but we do fall down, but we want to be able to kind of wobble back up. And rebalancing doesn't just occur in a quick instant for any of us. I don't think it takes a little bit of time and all these combinations of things. But if we can rebalance and recenter and stay present more often, then we can be like a tall tree for our beloveds. And then they can know, oh, wow, mom's doing it. I could do it too. Or, like she rediscovered how to handle all of her discomfort and pain, and she's working through it, and she's still protecting her happiness. Wow, maybe I can do that.
Mhm.
Because those of us who struggle, those of our beloveds who struggle with substance use issues and have mental health challenges, that's one of their hugest things, I believe, Bridgitte, is that
Yeah.
they have shame, and they feel like maybe they can't do it. And so that's when the relapses occur. They go, oh my gosh, this is too overwhelming. I'm just going to take a hit or go get some meth or drink myself to sleep tonight and avoid, or whatever, or take too many meds. And so we want to be able to live as an example of people who can handle discomfort overwhelm. We can move through it and we can let it impact us so that we can guard our contentment and have a foundation of happiness underneath it all.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, so speaking of relapse, that leads me to the part of your story that that stood out to me. It was when your son was expelled for getting drunk on school property and getting another student drunk. That was a difficult part. It really stung me because it was after a harrowing night that he had agreed to return home, as long as he did not have to return to wilderness therapy, if I'm pronouncing that correctly,
Mm-hmm.
incorrectly. And you said, okay, but this was a lie. You had already arranged for a squad of crisis interventionists to take him back to wilderness safety. So my question is, what is your greatest insight from that moment? The decision to lie to save your son, because in reading his anguish of not wanting to go through just came through so strongly, and I know that it probably wasn't a situation where you're like, oh, now I regret it, but you were going against something he did not want. So what's your greatest insight now from where you are when you look at that?
Looking back, he was only 15 and a half, and his judgment was already altered by using weed, drugs, and alcohol every day. And I had the clarity and whole being perspective, not just from my mind, but I knew in my body that he needed to be clean and away from drugs and alcohol for at least 9 months or a year. I just knew it because I knew he had a young brain that was being impacted by these substances. And his judgment isn't completely and fully developed in a person until they're at least 25. And I wanted to give him a chance to grow and learn. And so I just had to really trust, again, the rightest thing. There weren't, for a 15 and a half year old, there aren't treatment centers that are longer than a month or 2 or 3. And so wilderness at the time was what I had read about. And Dr. Phil said is really one of the best rites of passage for a teenage boy, because they're away from screens, they're learning success skills, they're out 30 miles away from anything, they're learning how to talk about their feelings because it's peer supported. The family was involved. Our whole family was doing family therapy on our own, and then once a week family therapy. My son was learning to meditate. I knew all this in advance too. I knew that this program offered all of this, that he would learn to meditate, and he would learn to do yoga regularly, and he would have the capacity to make his own fire from flint. What a cool rite of passage, right? For a teenager. And I knew that our family could not transform in the way that we needed to, Bridgitte, on our own. I knew that the resources that we had available in our city weren't strong enough. And I knew that our family needed to morph and change, because I just needed to practice and embed some skills myself. And so did my son's dad. And we just hadn't succeeded on our own in that 1 month time when we really tried to create our own in-home program. And so it was the hardest thing. I think you're asking a great question. One of my insights was that I have got to trust the process.
Mm.
And to me, trust the process means trust the universe, trust myself, trust our family, that we're all going to come at some new realizations and embody some new changes in ourselves and in our family if we can receive the support that we need. Because we just weren't doing it on our own. And so I guess I knew some of that before that night, when I just said, honey, this is the choice. This is what's happening. And I just had a deep sense that this was the best way. And not everyone can afford wilderness therapy. And it was a struggle for me too. I had to pool resources from my savings and so forth. But most of us can find something. We can find a relative with whom our beloved can go live for a period of time, or we can see if the resource, like the wilderness program, has a scholarship fund, which they did. And they gifted me with some financial assistance as well. But most of us, if we really know that something has to change, we will find what that change is. So I learned to trust myself and trust the process, and to believe that I could do a really tough thing that was the rightest thing. And it was really hard to being away from him, because he ended up being away for over a year. And yet I saw him every 3 weeks. And when we got together, we'd play ping pong and drink cocoa. And we really cultivated a new and different kind of relationship because he was clean and sober. Whereas before, most of the time he was high, and some of the time he was relying on another substance like alcohol or LSD or something. And so we just had a different kind of connection that was more soulful.
Okay. Well, I really felt a lot of love when in your said, I learned to trust the process and to be able to acknowledge and receive the support that is there for you, because that really is so important. And I can't even imagine how difficult that was for you to do that. But I definitely feel the love and the trust the process. I agree with that.
Thank you.
What would you say to, what would you share, or let me back up. What do you now know that you would share with other parents about the signs to look for to indicate that their child might be quietly suffering from a lack of knowing how to process difficult emotions or a situation like the ones that your family dealt with?
It's so important for us to pay attention without fear and anxiety to what our sons and daughters are doing. So if they're sneaking, if they're lying, if they're spending time with people that when they come home, they kind of seem altered, and that can be any number of ways. If they're missing school, those are some of the really important red flags. And that's where it's time for us to go on a walk with them. Maybe a lot of people say, sit down and talk with them. But do teenagers like it when we say, okay, let's sit down and have a talk? Not usually. So, maybe we go for a walk with them, or maybe we say, let's go play mini golf. Or perhaps we say, let's start doing something together that we both really enjoy. Maybe a yoga class 3 times a week, something like that. And we start having a relationship with our loved one where they will open up more and where they enjoy spending time with us. And it's not just because we're grilling them, asking them questions, So I think when those signs are warning us, it's time for us to do something different, because what we've been doing isn't working. And so it doesn't mean we're bad as parents. And it doesn't even necessarily mean the situation is going to lead to something necessarily bad. Lots of times we can prevent things before they happen by making some of these kinds of changes.
Those are great suggestions. And while I'm not dealing with addictive behaviors in my youngest son, we have a 15-year-old, and I totally resonate with what you just suggested, because I have been doing that. So it's not enough to just say, well, you get off the cell phone, just turn it off. I mean, I could do that, but he just doesn't do that. So then it's like, okay, I have to do something different. So I will say, let's go to the beach or to the botanical gardens, or let's go for a walk. And what I have noticed is that, he'll say, oh, I don't want to go. I don't want to get dressed. And then we go, and he totally ends up having a good time. And what is pivotal that I want to share that I noticed is when we're out in these outings, he will just spontaneously give me a hug or put his arm around me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's something happening here. I'm not sure what, but I know it's right, So that is a way, it isn't always the easiest path to just say, do this, stop doing that, but just being with the child and just getting to know them in a different way and doing something different, because they may not always know what to do, but you have more resources and you can figure something out. You can drive them someplace.
You're so right. You're making so many great points, because being with them is part of what activates change. We're building and cultivating a relationship which can impact them. And the relationship that we have with them can help them to maybe come back to a place where they have different judgment and they can look at things from a different type of perspective.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So, gosh, so much goodness in what you've said. I'm just curious of this whole experience of all these years that you've gone through. What has been the most surprising part about being consciously brave for you? And how has this experience changed your worldview?
I would say that what really impacts me being consciously brave is that I'm capable of actually doing it. And everyone is. We're all born with the seeds of bravery. We just have to cultivate them, just like we're born with the capacity to love really well. It just takes practice, and practice with different kinds of people and different types of situations. It's the same with bravery. So when we really learn how to be brave, it's because we've practiced it in different kinds of situations. And so for me, I practice when I'm calm, and then I practice kind of in between, the gray area, when I might be disrupted. And then I practice too as well when I'm in a crisis, because that's where we really have to put what we know to action, right? And
Right.
so I practice conscious breathing all the time. That's probably my main go-to, is I breathe in consciously, aware of my emotion and what's happening in my body, what's happening in my essence, what's my intuition saying, and what's going on in the energy space around me. So that sounds like a lot, but we can do it really quick and just see which of those zones are jumping out at us. And I practice that conscious breathing all the time, so that if a situation occurs, then that's my first go-to. I breathe in consciously and I breathe out consciously before I make a decision, before I respond. And it might just be for a few seconds, or it might be for a few minutes.
Because you have to know yourself, know thyself, and when, okay, I'm starting to feel like, I'm the grounding is being released. Like I need to anchor myself. Like I need something, be it conscious breathing, meditation, journaling, or for me, because we're not too far, sometimes it's just going to sit at the beach and stare at the water, stare at the ocean.
Yes.
I know when I need it, when it's like, okay, I'm feeling like I'm on the edge.
Oh,
To
yes.
be in tune, to
Mhm.
when you need these, I don't know if you would call them soothing or grounding practices, but something to help you just stabilize your internal self.
Soothing and grounding practices is a great word for it. And I love that you go into nature. And for those of our listeners, if you don't know the healing power of nature, give it a try every single day for a week. And I think you'll discover it. Because like you're saying, just hearing water, or looking at leaves move in a breeze, or smelling a flower, or just looking at a landscape, or staring at the sky, there's just so much healing and soothing power in that. And it actually does the neurobiology, it helps rewire the brain.
Wonderful. Okay, and last question. What is the most surprising part that you've learned about the benefit, the choice to bring love to difficult situations?
Bringing love to difficult situations helps me to have empathy.
Mm,
And I made some choices and some mistakes
yes.
early on, 12 years ago, that weren't based on empathy. They were more based on fear. And I had a lot of anxiety and panic back then, because so many things were occurring at once, and they were coming in waves and then repeated waves. And that had begun to immobilize me. And I bet that's happened for some of our listeners as well, and maybe for you too, Bridgitte. And so to stop that is absolutely key. But how? So the empathy piece starts with ourselves. If we have self-compassion, then we can view someone else and the situation they're in with different eyes. So that's really probably the biggest thing for me, is being able to have deep empathy, to walk in the shoes of my husband, my sons, and just to see what are they going through from their own perspectives.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. To see someone with different eyes. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Wow. Well, we hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation with Pamela Brinker. Little Visionaries is an independent bookstore that, beyond selling books, hosts community-focused author interviews and community events. And remember, the best way to support your local independent bookstore and the community we serve is as simple as buying a book. So many wonderful points here today. In her powerful new book, Conscious Bravery, Caring for Someone with Addiction, Pamela Brinker combines her professional knowledge with her personal experiences to create a caring and helpful guide for those who are dealing with loved ones struggling with addiction and mental health issues. Readers will not only learn how to navigate the emotional roller coaster of addiction, but how to take one impossible step at a time to survive and thrive with positivity. You can learn more at bebrave.us. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here with you. I'm really grateful.